So the latest Daredevil series just wrapped up. Let's talk about it. Daredevil Born Again was a show that I was very hyped for, yet at the same time cautiously optimistic about. I'm more of a casual fan of the superhero genre. I'm not super invested in it as much as a lot of other people are, and there are very few superheroes I actually care about. However, I absolutely loved the original Daredevil series produced by Netflix. Prior to watching the original Daredevil show, I had absolutely no interest in the character, but I decided to give the show a chance anyway, and not only was I absolutely blown away by the Netflix series, but the show made me fall in love with the character of Matt Murdock, aka Daredevil. I ended up becoming very invested in this character and eager to learn more about him. I remember when the original Netflix series was cancelled. Sure, I was disappointed that I wouldn't be seeing Charlie Cox's take on the character again, but it didn't bother me as much because I felt like the ending to Season 3 was a great send-off for this version of the character. I felt like Daredevil's arc kinda came full circle by the end of Season 3. But nevertheless, I still wanted more. So when Charlie Cox finally reprised his role in Spider-Man No Way Home before eventually Daredevil Born Again was announced, I was very excited for what the future would hold. I remember there were rumors that Daredevil Born Again was going to be a soft reboot that ignored the events of the original series while also repeating what came before, and I absolutely hated that idea. So I was very glad when Marvel pivoted the direction, turning this new series into a continuation of the original show, and hearing about that new direction definitely elevated my excitement. Yet at the same time, I didn't want to get my hopes up too much, so I went into this new show with tempered expectations. And now that the final episode has just dropped, I want to discuss my thoughts on the show. So, let's get into it. Before we continue with the video, I'd just like to say that my debut science fiction novel is out now, link in the description below. So for this video, I won't be reviewing each episode individually, that would just take up way too much time. Instead, I'm going to briefly summarize the story before moving on to discuss what I liked, what I disliked, point out anything else that I feel like is worth mentioning, aspects I want to delve into a little more in depth before giving my final thoughts. Daredevil Born Again starts with the original trio, Matt, Foggy, and Karen, who are on a night out at a bar in New York City. Foggy gets a call from one of his clients, who he's keeping safe at his apartment, that he is in danger, forcing Matt to sprint into action as Daredevil and go rescue him. However, it was a trap. While Karen and Foggy are still at the bar, they're attacked by Poindexter, aka Bullseye from the original series. This results in Foggy's death, which enrages Matt to the point where he breaks his no-kill rule, throwing Bullseye off a rooftop, which somehow he managed to survive. After crossing the line, grief-stricken over Foggy's death, Matt decides to quit being Daredevil. 1 year later, Matt is working for a new law firm, but is still in grief over Foggy. Bullseye gets life in prison after murdering Foggy before Karen and Matt reunite. However, they ultimately part ways because of their shared grief. However, Matt ends up dating a new woman, a therapist named Heather Glenn. Meanwhile, antagonist from the original series, Wilson Fisk, aka Kingpin, decides to run for mayor. Matt finds out that Fisk's campaign was ultimately a success while out on a date with Heather, but unbeknownst to everybody else, Fisk's life isn't as great as it might appear to be, as he is currently having problems with his wife, Vanessa, after finding out that she had an affair, forcing the two to attend marriage counseling. Following this event, Matt gets a new client, Hector Ayala, who has been arrested for murdering a cop. However, he is innocent. Through this new case, Matt uncovers two revelations. The first one being that his client is none other than the vigilante White Tiger, who rose to prominence after Matt retired his Daredevil alter ego. The second being that the cops involved in Hector's case are corrupt and are part of a group who idolize the Punisher, even going as far as to get his logo tattooed on them, engraving his logo onto their bullet casings and wearing his logo as a part of their clothing. Matt manages to win the court case at the cost of revealing Hector's secret identity as the White Tiger to the public. However, the following night, Hector is assassinated by the corrupt Punisher cops. Matt consoles Hector's grief-stricken niece, beginning to believe that maybe New York still needs Daredevil after all. Meanwhile, a member of Fisk's mayoral staff, Daniel Blake, accidentally exposes insider information to the press after a drunken night out. He apologizes and Fisk forgives him, valuing his sincerity and loyalty, something that he feels like he lacks from his wife and everyone else in his life. Following Hector's death, Matt decides to investigate the murder, visiting the murder site and discovering the bullet casing from the gun that killed Hector engraved with the Punisher's logo. Matt tracks down Frank Castle, the real Punisher, to investigate further, leading to an emotional and aggressive confrontation where Frank challenges Matt's faith in the legal system, using Foggy's death as a pressure point to make Matt snap, drive the point home that Matt didn't do enough to avenge his death. This later sparks Matt's darker half, Daredevil, to resurface as he reclaims his suits and weapons, practicing with them, while at the same time it is revealed that Fisk is secretly holding Adam prisoner, the man his wife had an affair with, eating a meal in front of him as a form of torture, having forced Adam to starve inside a cell for God knows how long. A little while later, during the day, Matt visits the bank but is caught in a bank robbery. He manages to stop the bank robbery under the radar and finds out the robbers are looking for a very specific diamond on behalf of their mysterious boss. Matt recovers the diamond and gives it to the bank's assistant manager, Yusuf. However, the bank robbery isn't enough to complete Matt's transformation back into Daredevil. What ends up sparking his complete transformation is when Hector Ayala's niece, Angela Del Toro, is abducted by a serial killer named Muse while investigating the circumstances surrounding Hector's assassination. Matt successfully defeats Muse and saves Angela's life. Unfortunately, Muse escapes and is now on the run. Meanwhile, Fisk has snapped and beats Adam to the brink of death before sitting alone with his unconscious body, reflecting what he has done. He's also recruited the corrupt cops responsible for Hector's death, turning them into the founding members of his new anti-vigilante task force. Matt later tracks down Muse after finding out that he's gone after his girlfriend, Heather, under the false guise of a client. She's forced to kill him in self-defense and is sent to hospital from her wounds after Matt stabilizes her. However, Fisk's anti-vigilante task force take credit for Muse's death, and he's framed as a vigilante instead of a serial killer in order to turn the public against vigilantes more. Later, Matt and Helena are fighting with each other. Remorseful over how she killed Muse, she tries to shift the blame onto both Daredevil and Muse, and in this argument, Matt discovers that Fisk and Vanessa are actually clients of hers as she is acting as their marriage counselor, something that disturbs Matt a lot, believing that Fisk is trying to get into his life through her. However, while Matt and Helena's relationship is going through some difficulties, Fisk and Vanessa's are improving. Fisk comes clean, leading Vanessa to where he has been keeping Adam prisoner, apologizing to her. Not wanting the truth about how Fisk has been treating Adam to get out and affect not just Fisk's reputation, but also their standing as a couple in high society, she shoots Adam. This strengthens their relationship, and they host a black tie event which Helena and Matt are both invited to. During this event, Fisk privately confronts I really should have looked up how to pronounce this dude's name before recording this video. During this event, Fisk privately confronts Jack Duquesne about his double life as a masked fencing vigilante, threatening to take him down with his anti-vigilante task force. Matt and Helena also quarrel a little bit at the event, but Matt's attention is soon drawn away from her and to Vanessa when he finally comes to the realization that she was in fact the one who ordered Poindexter to assassinate Foggy. Matt confronts Vanessa about this while she's dancing with Fisk, but speaking of Poindexter, he manages to escape prison, disguising himself as a police officer and reaching the event. As soon as Matt detects Poindexter, who is about to assassinate Fisk, Matt dives in front of Fisk, saving his life and taking a bullet for him. Unfortunately, Fisk sees this as an opportunity to kill and be rid of Matt while he's in a weakened state. He sends an assassin to the hospital to kill Matt, also triggering a blackout to cover up the murder, but thankfully, Matt manages to escape and slips out of the hospital under the radar. He returns to his apartment, where Frank Castle is waiting for him, sent by Karen to make sure he's okay. The two are then forced to work together as Daredevil and the Punisher, as the apartment is raided by Fisk's anti-vigilante task force, resulting in the apartment getting blown up, but they successfully manage to escape, regrouping at Frank's home with Karen, where we get some foreshadowing that there might be some romantic tension between Frank and Karen. Matt and Karen, now knowing that Vanessa killed Foggy, start doing research into why she wanted to assassinate him. This leads them to discovering that the case Foggy was working on at the time of his death had the potential to expose some of her shady business dealings that inevitably result in what we see in the season finale. Fisk and Vanessa completely taking over the city of New York, enacting martial law and giving the anti-vigilante task force free rein to kill anybody they please without consequence. Speaking of which, Fisk ends up killing Police Commissioner Gallo after he discovers that Gallo intends to stand up to him and stop his plans. Later, he ends up using Gallo's death as an excuse to enact martial law in the city. Meanwhile, Frank is going after the anti-vigilante task force, who successfully capture him. They tell Frank how much they admire him, offering him a place on the task force with them, to which Frank rejects, insulted by their very existence and angered that they don't truly understand him. With no other choice, they hold Punisher in captivity. The following morning, the power in New York City comes back on, and Fisk uses this as an opportunity to gather more public support, even going as far as to successfully recruit Heather Glenn as a part of his team. With that, the series ends with Matt in Josie's bar, coming to terms with how he tried to kill Bullseye, and creating a small network of people to rise up and fight Fisk, a resistance against his tyranny. Oh yeah, and in an end credit scene, Frank breaks a dude's arm and manages to succeed in escaping captivity. So now that we've discussed the story, what are my thoughts on this show? What did I like and enjoy the most? First of all, I like how this show handled its characters. I really enjoy how consistent and in line they feel with their original series counterparts. Everything these characters go through in this show feels like a natural continuation of the Netflix series. One good example of this is when Matt took a bullet for Fisk, and instead of feeling grateful for his sacrifice, Fisk is cold-hearted enough to see this as the perfect opportunity to kill Matt once and for all while he's vulnerable. That is exactly what I would imagine someone like Kingpin to do in this scene, and it's consistent with the character that was established way back in season 1 of the original series. Another example is the Punisher, who disapproves of the cops adopting his logo and doing things that he doesn't approve of in his name. They even try to offer Frank a spot in their task force, and seeing him reject them both made a lot of sense of the character and was very satisfying to watch. I also really enjoy the personal journeys each of the characters undertook in their character arcs throughout the season. Watching Matt growing more and more disillusioned with the law and his job as a lawyer throughout the series was very interesting to watch, even going as far as to have episodes where he lashes out, like at that client of his who was lying in episode 8, and it was also a nice touch for the writers to constantly put Matt into situations that show him why it's necessary to become Daredevil again. I just overall found the subject matter of what do you do when the law fails the common citizen to be very interesting for a show like this. I didn't expect the show to explore why vigilantism is sometimes necessary for the greater good. Usually with stories like these, writers tend to explore the opposite, why vigilantism is wrong and isn't the right solution. So to see a show do a reverse of that trope and playing devil's advocate, pun not intended, felt fresh. And while we're on the subject of Matt's inner turmoil, I also really like how a huge part of his personal journey is that he thought he was immune to his inner darkness and above crimes such as killing. That was until Foggy's death, where he snapped and attempted to murder Poindexter. One of my personal beliefs in life is that you can't reject or kill your own personal darkness. You can only accept that it's there, accept that it's a part of you, and just leave it be. You can't change it or get rid of it. You just have to learn to not let it control you for the worse. I think that's what Matt experienced in the show, learning how to accept his dark half, that it's a part of him, and coming to the understanding that, much like everybody else, he is not infallible. He is just as susceptible to being broken as much as anybody else. Not only that, but Matt also has to learn how to rebuild himself again after the personal tragedy that was Foggy's death. I love how this is symbolized in the show's opening credits, how that intro symbolizes Daredevil crumbling down, only to be rebuilt and born again. The symbolism in that intro is very powerful. Another character whose journey I found quite interesting was, surprisingly enough, Vanessa. The drama, conflict, and tensions between both her and Fisk were a welcome addition because I felt like in the original series they were way too perfect and flawless of a couple, so seeing them quarrel and struggle felt much more realistic and significantly more interesting. And again, going back to what I said about these characters feeling consistent, Vanessa killing Adam felt in line with the character. The symbolism from that point onwards was very powerful, where she starts wearing red, and in her final scene she sits next to the bloodstain on Fisk's painting. That visual symbolism did a great job of showing just how she was becoming more and more corrupted as the story progressed. Oh, and speaking of characters with a lot of blood on their hands, Muse. Let's talk about Muse. Now, there's one aspect of Muse's character that I really disliked, however, I'll leave those thoughts for the criticism section of this video. For now, as for the stuff I did like about this character, well, I thought Muse and his entire vibe, his entire presence, was such a wonderful and perfect fit for the world of Daredevil. He's a villain that feels grounded and therefore complements the groundedness of Daredevil's world very well. The scene where Heather finds out her client is actually Muse was very good too. It was very engaging. Plus, I loved the final line in that scene where Muse tells her, "I know what you're thinking. Can I make it to the door in time?" I found that to be so intimidating because I couldn't help but put myself in her shoes and wonder what I would feel in her position. Another character worth pointing out is Hector Ayala, aka White Tiger. His time in the show was incredibly short, but I really enjoyed his subplot. Plus, it was a shocking twist to have his secret identity revealed in court. I also really like how subtle the foreshadowing was for how his niece might become the future Tiger one day. It wasn't in your face, but the clues are there if you really look into them. Personally, I'm interested in seeing more from her. The actress is great, and I really love how much initiative and passion the character of Angela has. She has a very strong sense of justice and takes a lot of initiative instead of remaining passive. Granted, her taking initiative almost resulted in her death at the hands of Muse, but that fiery aspect of her character was still compelling to watch. This show did a great job of making me like this character and feeling interested in seeing how she develops and evolves into the next White Tiger. Plus, I really liked how her getting captured by Muse was the final push Matt needed in order to become Daredevil again. It felt natural and logical. I also really liked the actor who played Hector, Camar de los Reyes. It was rather saddening to hear that he passed away recently, so I wish his family and loved ones my deepest condolences and all the best. Anyway, while we're on the subject of the actors, let's discuss their acting a bit more in depth. This show has some very great acting from its main cast of characters, with the two scenes that stuck out to me the most being Karen and Matt's argument after Poindexter's court hearing, and the scene where Matt and Frank are arguing over their conflicting morals. For the first scene I pointed out, the acting between Charlie Cox and Deborah Wall in this scene was very good. Watching the both of them in so much pain, bickering with each other, was actually genuinely heartbreaking to watch. They both had to be very convinced and immersed in the scene. However, this scene is surpassed by just how excellent the scene between Matt and Frank is. Their acting was awesome. We got to see not just aggression from the both of them, but also some very heavy vulnerability. This was a very deep and emotional scene. Charlie Cox and John Bernthal knocked it out of the park. No, besides the acting and the characters, what else did I like about the show? Well, I have to say I really love how they portrayed Daredevil's abilities in this show, using not just sound cues, but by also changing the aspect ratio. I thought altering the aspect ratio was a very cool idea, either shrinking it or enlarging it depending on which of Matt's senses was being activated. Speaking of which, we also get to see Matt use his abilities in so many cool ways, such as cracking open a safe, or by running his hands over paintings to identify who the person in the painting is, or using it to hear what people all over New York City are saying or thinking about Wilson Fisk as mayor. And finally, the last thing I want to discuss that I liked is the action. I love how punchy and brutal the combat feels. A good example of this is the ending of episode 2 when Matt is assaulted by corrupt cops and is forced to fight back. The show takes violence to an extreme that I don't think many people would typically expect out of a company like Disney, and personally, I found that to be very reassuring. When I first heard that they were making this show, I assumed that they were going to dilute the violence of the original series, and I hated that idea. Hell, I wasn't the only person that thought this. I remember sending a scene from the second season to one of my friends, you know, the one where Frank murders a bunch of people in prison in such an over-the-top bloody way, and my friend told me something along the lines of, "Oh yeah, there's no way Disney will ever allow violence like that in the new series," and I agreed with him on that. However, I am very glad to be proven wrong. Like I said, I found this to be very reassuring, and I can respect that this series is willing to go as far, if not further, than the original series, instead of diluting or censoring the grittiness of Daredevil's world. The show feels incredibly raw in the best way possible. Like, just look at that one scene in the final episode where Gallo was murdered, which I am absolutely not going to show here, otherwise this video will probably get age restricted. Fisk dislodged this man's entire jaw. Like, holy shit. It reminded me of how in season 1 of the original series, Fisk murdered a man by bashing his head off with a car door. It was also a joy to see Poindexter use his abilities again during fight scenes. I thought that was one of the coolest, most inventive aspects of the original series' season 3. The scene where Poindexter breaks out of prison by using his broken tooth as a projectile was so inventive. Gross, but super inventive. Anyway, overall, the fight scenes were great and I really enjoyed them. I feel like the ones in the original series were way more memorable, but the new ones are also very well made. There's a lot of potential for even greater fight scenes in future seasons to come. However, as much as there were aspects of this show that I definitely liked, it's worth pointing out the stuff that I didn't like as much. So, what are my gripes with Daredevil Born Again? Well, thankfully, I don't have too many gripes with the show, but there were some, so let's dive into them. For starters, while this is a very competent show, I'm not feeling the same X factor that I felt with the original series. There was something truly special about the original Netflix series, and while this new series is good as well, I can't deny it. It feels like something special is missing. What was that something special? What was that X factor? Hell if I know, but I could definitely feel it while watching the original series, and I don't feel it anymore with this new show. I wasn't expecting this new series to feel completely like the original going into it, but the absence of an X factor is still something I feel like is worth mentioning. But don't get me wrong, I still think this show is very compelling, very well made. Another thing I kinda disliked that's worth mentioning is the street interviews. Throughout the series, we get street interviews from fictional outlets, interviewing the people of New York regarding what their thoughts are on current events. At first, I actually liked these street interviews, but as the show went on, it felt more and more like they were using these interviews as an excuse to tell more than show. I understand this to a certain extent. Being a writer myself, I've also made the mistake of telling more than showing in the past, but still, I wish they showed us what the common people were experiencing in this show rather than just have them tell us what they're experiencing. Although, credit to where credit is due, in the final news report they did actually show us what was happening instead of just directly telling us, so that was appreciated. And finally, as for the last thing I disliked about the show, it was the fact that we didn't really get to see much of Muse. I mentioned earlier that there was only one aspect about his character that I disliked, and this is it. Muse has so little screen time, and he doesn't really get to do a whole lot in the story before they prematurely kill him off. This absolutely hurt. I thought he was such an awesome concept for a serial killer, such an excellent villain for Daredevil to go up against, but in the end, it feels like he was wasted. It feels like there was so much untapped potential for Muse that will never be explored, and, yeah, that just makes me very sad. I would have loved it if Muse was spared so that he could make a comeback in Season 2. Like I said, he's such an awesome concept for a villain. I'm dying to see more of him, but that's probably never going to happen. It's just really disappointing. But anyway, those are the extent of my dislikes when it comes to this show. I'm thankful this show, for the most part, lived up to my expectations, with only a small handful of negatives. Alright, so now you probably have a pretty good picture as to what my overall thoughts and opinions are on this new show, but before we move on to my final thoughts, I just wanted to take a moment and point out any other things about the show that I want to discuss a little bit more in depth. Well, for starters, I think the main thing I want to discuss a bit more in depth before we wrap up this video is the controversial death of Foggy. I had a very strong feeling months prior to the show's debut that they were either going to kill off Foggy, Karen, or both of them. The fact that they went through with killing Foggy was something that actually really rubbed me the wrong way at first. If you've been following the development behind the scenes of the series like I did, you'll know that the inclusion of Foggy, Karen, and Poindexter was an afterthought. They weren't originally meant to be in this series. So, at the time of the pilot episode's release, it felt like the only reason why they killed off Foggy was so that the writers could have an excuse as to why Foggy, Karen, and Poindexter aren't featured prominently in this show. That they would have rather not included these characters, and by extension be forced to carry on the baggage from the original show. It feels like they only did this so that they could get all that baggage out of the way as fast as possible and start fresh. Now, there's a reason why I'm bringing up my thoughts and feelings on Foggy's death in this section of the video instead of the dislike section, and that's because, while this left a bad taste in my mouth at first, as the show went on, I began to realize that Foggy's death was actually necessary for not just the story they were trying to tell, but the themes they wanted to explore too. I doubt the personal journey Matt went through in the series would have felt nearly as strong if something as severely tragic as Foggy's death didn't happen. Looking back now, I no longer feel like they killed him off just for the sake of getting rid of him and all that unwanted baggage from the original series. Instead, I feel like Foggy's death did a really great job at setting up the events of the story and establishing the themes of inner healing and self-acceptance that Matt goes through in this show. Also, I'm just really glad that they didn't kill off Karen as well. I think it would have been an incredibly bitter pill to swallow if both Karen and Foggy were killed off. I'm thankful that she's still going to be a part of the story moving forward. Now, the last thing I want to discuss for this section of the video is none other than the show's tone. My thoughts on the tone is something that I'm finding difficult to put into words, but I'll try. While this show feels consistent with that of the original Netflix series, there's something about this show's vibe and tone that just feels different. It's a weird feeling to put into words, like it feels different while also feeling consistent with what came before. Does that make any sense? It probably doesn't. I remember someone I follow on Instagram mentioning that this show feels like it's trying to imitate the original series instead of actually being the real thing. And while I don't entirely agree with that sentiment, now that I've seen the show in full, I can definitely understand why he would think that. The tone just feels kinda jarring for me personally. It's like the show is two separate things at the same time. I suppose this must be due to the show's behind-the-scenes challenges, how there was a conflict between the creative visions of the original show and the new one. Keep in mind, this show was originally going to be much different, but they went back to change things and retroactively make this a sequel to the original series, so that might explain why I feel so conflicted about the show's tone. I'm sure that Season 2 won't have the same issue now that they've solidified a creative vision and direction to take the series in, but only time will tell. In conclusion, I overall liked this show. The way the season ended makes me incredibly interested in seeing where they go with Season 2. They're setting up a lot of very intriguing plot threads, and the entirety of New York City becoming corrupted under physics control, forcing Daredevil to start an uprising sounds very exciting. But like I mentioned previously, the show's tone and vibe is pretty different to the original series. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, it's just something that I feel like I'm not entirely used to yet. I feel like I'm still trying to grow accustomed to how different it feels compared to the original series, but overall, my thoughts on this show are mostly positive so far, and I'm very keen to see where Season 2 goes. But what about you? What are your thoughts on the new Daredevil series? Whatever you think, feel free to let me know in the comments below, and to like the video. If you're interested in seeing more from me, I cover a lot of movies, shows, video games, and other pop culture that I enjoy in this channel, so if that sounds like content you'd enjoy, feel free to subscribe. I'm also an author, so if you're interested in reading something new, whether that may be sci-fi, fantasy, etc., then feel free to check out my work, links in the descriptions below. But with all that being said, thank you so much for checking out my video, and hopefully I'll see you again in the next one.